The evening began with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves as a young traveler named Arin set foot on an unfamiliar path. He had left his village with no map and no destination, guided only by a restless feeling in his heart. Okay? The world beyond the borders of his home was vast, filled with strangers, challenges, and mysteries that no teacher or book had ever prepared him for. He did not know it yet, but each step was leading him toward lessons that would mark him forever. As he moved further from comfort, Arin encountered a frail old man struggling to carry a bundle of sticks across a steep hill. Many others passed by without a glance, but something in Arin's chest would not let him walk away. He offered his hand, lifting the burden with ease, and walked beside the man until he reached his small hut. The old man's smile was quiet, almost broken, but his eyes glistened with gratitude. Night, Arin realized the truth of kindness, that even the smallest act could mend a heart in ways unseen, creating ripples far beyond imagination. Days later, in a bustling town filled with merchants, Arin faced a temptation he had never known. A pouch of silver coins lay unattended near a market stall, shining under the sunlight. His fingers twitched, the weight of poverty pressing on him like a stone. For a moment, the idea of taking what was not his seemed to echo louder than his conscience. But he returned the pouch to its rightful owner, who looked at him with wide disbelief. The merchant clasped Arin's hands, whispering that honesty was rarer than gold. That night, Arin understood that honesty was not about rules, but about the invisible thread of trust that bound human souls together. On his journey further, Arin found himself among a crowd that mocked a weary beggar at the edge of the road. Torn clothes and tired eyes made the man invisible to most, or worse, a target of cruelty. Arin stopped and shared his food, kneeling to look the man in the eyes. The beggar wept quietly, as though he had long forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Arin carried that moment with him like a flame, learning that respect was not reserved for the powerful, but for every soul that breathes. But the hardest lesson came when storms fell upon him. Rain lashed at his skin, hunger gnawed at his stomach, and loneliness crept into every corner of his mind. Days blurred into nights, yet he pressed forward, holding on to hope with trembling hands. Each struggle felt endless, but with every sunrise he discovered that patience was a teacher disguised as pain. The hardships that once felt like punishment slowly became his greatest strength. Arin's journey did not end with wealth or glory, but with wisdom carved into his heart. He learned that life itself was a book, written not with ink, but with choices, encounters, and trials. And though no page could be memorized, every lesson lived became unforgettable. As he walked into the horizon, he carried not just memories, but truths that no classroom had ever offered. If this story lingers in your heart, let it travel further. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of life's quiet lessons. And remember that every journey, no matter how uncertain, holds a wisdom waiting to be found. The road stretched longer than Arin had imagined, winding through valleys where shadows clung to the earth and mountains that seemed to scrape the heavens. Each new place tested him differently, as though life itself had taken the role of a silent teacher. One evening, weary and drenched in sweat, he reached a village preparing for a grand festival. Laughter filled the streets, lanterns glowed like stars, and the scent of roasted food tempted his empty stomach. Yet as he moved through the crowd, his eyes fell on a boy, ragged and hungry, watching the celebration from the shadows. Key's last piece of bread rested in his bag. Without hesitation, he handed it to the boy, who devoured it with tears streaming down his cheeks. In that instant, Arin realized that kindness was not about having much, but about giving from the little one carries. As days turned into weeks, Arin grew stronger in body, but gentler in spirit. On a quiet morning, he was invited into the home of a merchant who had heard whispers of the traveler's good deeds. The merchant placed a jewel on the table and left the room, testing the honesty of his guest. Arin stared at the jewel, his reflection fractured in its surface. Temptation called to him like a whisper, but he did not touch it. When the merchant returned, he saw the jewel untouched and smiled. He revealed that trust was the true treasure he sought to measure. For Arin, the lesson cut deeper than any warning written in a book was a choice made in silence when no one was watching. The journey led him next to a roadside inn where travelers from all walks of life gathered. There, he noticed how nobles were served with smiles while a humble farmer was ignored, his calloused hands resting on the table as though invisible. Arin rose and sat with the farmer, speaking to him as an equal. Slowly, others followed his example, and the inn filled with new respect. That night, Arin lay awake, reflecting on how greatness was not found in crowns or riches, but in the way one chose to honor the unnoticed. Storms returned, fiercer than before, testing his patience. Supplies dwindled, paths flooded, and exhaustion threatened to break him. He pressed forward anyway, whispering to himself that suffering was not punishment, but preparation. He recalled the old man, the merchant, and the beggar, realizing that every trial carried a seed of growth. Patience, he discovered, was not simply waiting was enduring without surrendering hope. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew deep, Arin knew that the journey was shaping him more than the destination ever could. The lessons carved into his spirit could not be learned in any book, for they were written in hunger, kindness, honesty, respect, and resilience. He carried them like sacred treasures, certain that the path ahead held more truths waiting to be uncovered. Would you like me to continue episode 3 in the same immersive flow, keeping the same moral storytelling style? Arin's path led him into a dense forest where sunlight barely pierced through the canopy. The silence there was heavy, broken only by the distant call of birds. For days he walked without seeing another soul, until he stumbled upon a small clearing where a young girl sat crying beside a broken cart. Her voice trembled as she explained that her family had gone ahead, leaving her to guard their belongings, but the cart's wheel had shattered and she could not move it alone. Without asking for reward or recognition, Arin worked tirelessly, lifting the cart and repairing it with branches and rope. The girl's gratitude was quiet, yet powerful, her tears replaced by a smile that seemed brighter than the sun. Night night, Arin thought of how compassion does not demand glory yet, only asks for the heart to act when needed. Further along the road, Arin reached a bustling city known for its towering walls and markets filled with riches. There he found work carrying goods for a wealthy trader. One evening, as he loaded a chest of coins, he saw a smaller pouch slip unnoticed from the chest. He could have claimed it, no one would have known, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. Yet he returned the pouch. Fader was astonished, for many before had failed this same unspoken test. The man told him that in a city built on greed, honesty was rarer than jewels. That night, Arin lay awake, understanding that trust, once lost, could never truly be restored, and that the weight of honesty was greater than gold. As weeks passed, Arin wandered into a small village plagued by division. Wealthy families dined in abundance, while laborers starved in silence. One evening, he noticed a servant cleaning the floor as nobles feasted above, their laughter rising like smoke. The servant's eyes carried a quiet sorrow, ignored by all. Arin walked over, sat beside him, and shared the food he had earned from his labor. The room fell silent, nobles staring in disbelief as a traveler treated a servant as an equal. That act, though small, lit a spark, and others began to share their meals. The lesson struck deep in Arin's heart. Respect was not granted by status, but by the simple truth that every soul deserves dignity. Yet the hardest trial was not from men, but from the earth itself. A storm raged through the mountains, stranding him on a narrow ledge, with rain pouring in sheets and wind tearing at his cloak. For 2 days he endured, soaked and starving, with no end in sight. Each hour tested his patience more than the last, but he clung to hope, whispering to himself that every storm would one day break. When the clouds finally parted, the sunrise painted the sky in colors he had never seen. In that light, he realized that patience was not passive, was the courage to hold on when everything seemed lost. With every step forward, Arin felt the invisible weight of these lessons shaping him. He began to understand that his journey was not about reaching a destination, but about becoming someone who could carry wisdom wherever he went. These lessons were etched into his very being, lessons no page or parchment could have taught him. And still, he sensed that greater trials and deeper truths awaited further down the road. The horizon stretched endlessly as Arin's feet carried him into lands where the soil cracked. Beneath the sun and water was scarce. The villages he passed were weary, their people bent under the weight of drought. In one such place, he came across a child carrying an empty jar, his lips parched, his steps faltering. Arin, though thirsty himself, gave the boy the last of his water. The boy's mother wept when she saw the kindness of a stranger, whispering blessings over him. Arin walked away with a dry throat, yet his heart felt nourished. He learned then that sacrifice was not about losing, but about giving what one most needed in order to keep another alive. His path led him to a caravan of merchants traveling across the desert. They welcomed him, offering food and shade in exchange for his strength to help guard their goods. Among them was a man with sharp eyes who seemed to test Arin at every turn. One night, a golden bracelet went missing, and whispers of theft circled the camp. Suspicion fell on Arin, the outsider with no name or wealth. He could have shouted, could have fought, but instead he remained calm, allowing his belongings to be searched. Nothing was found, and at dawn, the missing bracelet was discovered in the sand, dropped by mistake. The sharp-eyed man lowered his gaze, ashamed, and apologized. Arin forgave him without bitterness, understanding that honesty and patience together revealed more than anger ever could. As the caravan moved on, they encountered a band of beggars along the road. Dust clung to their faces, and their clothes were little more than rags. The merchants dismissed them with scorn, but Arin knelt among them, sharing his bread and speaking to them as though they were equals. One of the beggars, an old woman, placed her hand on his and said softly that greatness is not found in being above others, but in standing beside them. Her words sank deep into Arin's heart, echoing louder than the cheers of any crowd. The desert storms soon rose, fierce and unrelenting, forcing the caravan to scatter. Alone again, Arin pressed on, each step heavier than the last. Sand whipped against his face, and hunger carved sharp edges into his bones. For days he wandered with nothing but his will to guide him, clinging to memories of those he had helped and those who had taught him. He began to see patience not as waiting for storms to pass, but as walking through them, battered but unbroken. When he finally stumbled upon an oasis, the water felt like a miracle earned through every trial he had endured. As night fell and stars lit the desert sky, Arin realized that his journey was weaving a tapestry of unseen lessons. Every act of kindness, every moment of restraint, every ounce of respect was a thread binding him closer to truths no book could ever teach. Yet, in the quiet of the night, he sensed something still ahead, something that would test not only his patience, but the very core of who he was becoming. The road curved into a valley where mist clung to the ground like a veil, and Arin felt an unease that the air itself seemed to whisper. Villagers warned him not to linger, for the place was said to be cursed. Yet he pressed on, drawn by a quiet pull he could not name. Deep in the valley, he found an abandoned chapel, its walls crumbling, its doors hanging loose. Inside, candles long extinguished left behind a lingering scent of wax, and carvings of forgotten prayers marked the stone. Arin knelt among the ruins and felt the weight of silence pressing on him, as if the walls carried stories of those who had once sought hope here and left with nothing. In that stillness, he realized that even places abandoned by others could still hold meaning if one carried faith within. Continuing through the valley, Arin stumbled upon a group of travelers quarreling over their dwindling supplies. Their words grew sharp, and their hands reached for knives. He stepped between them, unarmed but steady, and spoke with calm. He offered to share the little food he carried, urging them to remember that hunger would end, but regret for blood spilled would not. The group hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons. Later, as they ate together, one of them told Arin he had saved more than their lives, he had saved their souls from staining themselves with hate. That night, Arin reflected that courage was not always about fighting. Sometimes it was about stopping a fight before it began. Days later, he came upon a nobleman's estate where servants worked tirelessly while their master feasted behind gilded doors. A servant collapsed in the heat, and while others ignored him, Arin carried the man to shade and gave him water. The nobleman emerged, sneering that a traveler had no place among his workers. Arin met his gaze without fear, reminding him that wealth and titles faded. But the way one treated others never vanished from memory. The nobleman turned away, yet whispers spread among the servants of the stranger who spoke truth without trembling. Arin walked on, knowing respect was owed not to crowns, but to character. A storm of another kind followed. Bandits descended upon the road at dusk, demanding Arin surrender everything. Though he had little, they took his bag and left him bruised in the dust. Alone and empty-handed, Arin felt despair claw at him, his patience cracking under the weight of loss. He nearly gave in to bitterness, nearly cursed the road that had offered him nothing but trials. Yet, as the stars appeared, he remembered the faces of those he had helped, the lessons carved into him by struggle. He rose again, limping but unbroken, whispering that even when stripped of all, one still carried the choice to remain true. When he reached the edge of the valley, the land stretched open into green fields under a soft dawn. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled of life instead of dust. He knew the journey ahead was far from over, but the valley had left its mark. It had shown him the fragile balance between despair and hope, selfishness and compassion, fear and courage. These were not lessons anyone could hand him. They were born in the moments when he chose who he would be. Yet, he sensed that the greatest test still waited beyond the horizon, a test that would ask more of him than kindness, honesty, or patience. The green fields carried Arin forward into a land that seemed almost gentle compared to the trials he had endured. Birds sang, streams glistened, and the air was filled with the scent of blossoms. For a time, he felt a peace he had not known in months, and he wondered if his journey of hardship had finally eased. Yet deep within, he sensed that this calm was not the end, but a pause before something greater, a silence before the storm. He traveled on with wary steps, carrying both hope and unease in his heart. In a small town nestled at the edge of the fields, Arin was welcomed by families who had heard whispers of a traveler known for kindness and honesty. They gave him food, shelter, and warmth, treating him as one of their own. For the first time, he felt the comfort of belonging. The longer he stayed, the more he noticed an undercurrent of fear in their voices. At night, villagers whispered of a cruel warlord who demanded tribute, taking grain, livestock, and even children when he pleased. The town lived under his shadow, powerless to resist. Arin listened, his chest tightening, knowing that the lessons life had carved into him were now being tested in ways he could not avoid. One night, the warlord's men rode in, armored and merciless, seizing what they wished while laughter echoed from their mouths. Arin watched from the shadows, his hands trembling. He could walk away, as so many had done before him, and continue his journey. No book would condemn him for protecting his own life. But the faces of the villagers, pale with terror, rooted him to the ground. He stepped forward and placed himself between the soldiers and a child they sought to drag away. The soldiers laughed at the lone traveler, but Arin did not move. His voice was steady as he told them that power built on fear was nothing compared to the strength of those who stand together. The soldiers struck him down, and pain shot through his body. Yet he rose again, blood on his lips, but fire in his eyes. The villagers, who had always bowed in silence, began to stir. Inspired by the stranger's defiance, they found courage they had long buried. One by one, they rose to resist, their numbers overwhelming the few soldiers who had come that night. The warlord's men retreated, swearing vengeance, but the spark had been lit. For the first time, the town believed it could stand. Arin lay bruised and weak, yet a quiet smile touched his face. He realized that lessons of kindness, honesty, respect, and patience had not been for him alone, they had been preparing him to awaken courage in others. Still, in the back of his mind, a shadow lingered. The warlord himself had not yet come, and Arin knew that when he did, the true test would not only measure his strength, but the strength of every soul he had touched. The night closed in, heavy and still, the villagers tending to him with gratitude in their eyes. Arin stared into the fire, knowing the greatest trial was yet to come, one that would decide not just his journey, but the future of those who had placed their hope in him. Dawn broke with a silence that felt unnatural, the kind of stillness that comes before devastation. The villagers stood gathered, eyes fixed on the horizon where dust rose in the distance. The warlord was coming, not with a handful of soldiers this time, but with an army. Fear rippled through the crowd, and many trembled, their newfound courage straining under the weight of reality. Arin, still weak from his wounds, rose slowly. His body ached, his strength was diminished, yet his eyes burned with the quiet fire of resolve. He knew he could not promise them victory, but he could promise them something greater, the chance to stand as more than victims. The warlord arrived draped in armor, his voice thundering as he mocked the small village that dared resist. He called for Arin to step forward, to kneel and surrender so the people might be spared. The villagers turned to Arin, their breaths held. He walked forward, steady despite the pain, and met the warlord's gaze. His voice was calm as he spoke of the lessons carved into his soul by the road, the power of kindness, the weight of honesty, the need for respect, the strength of patience, and above all, the courage to stand when all else urges retreat. He told the warlord that true power was not built on fear, but on unity. The warlord laughed and ordered his men to strike. Chaos erupted as villagers, inspired by Arin's unshaken stance, fought back with everything they had. What they lacked in weapons they replaced with will, and for every fall, another rose. The battle was desperate, the air filled with cries and the clash of steel. Arin fought with nothing but a staff, his movements unrefined but fueled by purpose. Each blow he took, he rose again, and with each rise, the villagers' courage grew. The warlord himself stepped into the fray, towering and merciless, striking Arin to the ground. For a moment, silence fell, and it seemed hope had died. But then Arin stood once more, bloodied and staggering, his staff broken in his hands. He looked not at the warlord, but at the people behind him, and shouted that their strength was greater than any tyrant's. His words ignited them, and together they surged forward. The warlord was forced back by the very people he had once enslaved, their unity breaking the chains of fear. In the end, the warlord fled, his army shattered not by weapons, but by the defiance of those who refused to bow. When the dust settled, the village stood scarred but unbroken. Arin collapsed, his body at last giving in, yet he smiled faintly as the villagers lifted him and called him brother. He realized then that his journey had never been about reaching a destination, but about leaving behind the lessons life had etched into him, lessons that now lived on in others. He had become not the hero of his own story, but the spark for countless new ones. As night fell and stars lit the sky, Arin knew his path was not finished. The road still stretched onward, filled with unknown trials and unseen truths. But wherever it led, he carried with him the certainty that life itself was the greatest teacher, and that the lessons born of struggle, kindness, and courage would outlive him in the hearts of those he had touched. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share 4 more journeys of morals that speak to the soul.